Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Charlie Center. I'm a board member for Friends of the River and have the privilege of hosting Riverside Chat number 4 tonight. I would like to start by saying that I know 2020 has been extremely hard for all of us and challenging. And our hearts and thoughts go to all of those who have recently been impacted by the fires across California, and to the first responders that are out there protecting our homes and the places that we love. My hope and belief is that tonight provides an hour of respite, entertainment, and community to those that are here. I've had the great privilege of knowing most of the individuals that have taken the time to speak tonight for much of my life. I greatly admire them as friends and family, and for being part of the fabric of our river community. They've each taken paths that are unique and distinct journeys, and they're willing to share their perspectives and what they've learned on those journeys with all of us here. So tonight we are taking it back to basics, to stories and words that conjure up images and places and feelings. There will be no video, no pictures, just conversation and stories. If you have any questions for the guests throughout the night, please feel free to type them in the chat box throughout the evening. Now, in addition to the guests we have, I would like to introduce Katie Scott, who will be moderating the conversation. Katie is a lifelong paddler and fellow river lover who is currently the digital strategist to California Attorney General Becerra. So without further ado, let's kick the night off, and I hand the mic to Katie Scott.
Thanks, Charlie, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. It is an absolute honor to get to spend the evening with such remarkable people who I really admire. Our first speaker this evening is Robin Center. Robin is a longtime environmental activist. She's the co-founder of Camp Lotus. She's an artist. She is the mother of the amazing Charlie and Rebecca. And Robin is really whom I consider to be the mother of the Coloma Lotus Valley. So we look forward to hearing your story, Robin. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Katie. That was beautifully said. I came to this perch where I'm sitting now, 800 feet above the South Fork of the American River, through other rivers. First, growing up on a farm with 6 siblings on the banks of the Merced River, where our parents were activists in protecting both people and places. Followed by some seasons living on the banks of the Stanislaus River in a tent at Chicken Falls, while volunteering for ETC. The Stanislaus River is where I learned how to row in a basket boat, roll in a kayak, spelunking, befriend Walter the miner who lived across the river from me, and studied and shared with passengers how the Indians had lived on the river. Through my deep love of place, I began collecting signatures to save the river with Prop 17, transferring to Sac State, and eventually moving into the FOR office. One day, Bill Center dropped by on his way to run a river classroom on the Eel River. The guide he came to pick up was sick, so my sister Nancy and I took his place. On the drive northwest, we discovered that Bill's mother had taught our father at Los Gatos High School, and that our sister Leslie was an AFS exchange student in New Zealand at the same time as Bill. Shortly following the trip, I helped Bill hang the Condemned Rivers of the Mother Lode photo show in Governor Brown's office. We hung the photo of the rattlesnake above Jerry's desk. After living together for 6 months in Berkeley, where Bill worked in nearby Oakland for ARDA, we decided to move to this land. We joined our neighbor on the hill by also living in a teepee just below the spot where I live now. In a short time, we began building a studio for me with recycled barnwood from my parents' farm. It became apparent that I was pregnant, and the studio became our little house. The previous year's drought had stalled raft trips on the South Fork, and when the weather broke in the winter of '78, soon after Rebecca was born, Bill and I ran Artist California operation and Camp Lotus. Camp Lotus's reservation system was kept in a small metal file box. There were 2 picker shacks for the pear orchard, a tiny store, no irrigation system on the grounds, and a small rafting warehouse. The SOFAR project, proposed by our county, threatened to put 4 dams on the river, leaving only a short section free-flowing in the state park. SMUD controlled the upper South Fork watershed and PG&E the Chili Bar Dam. They didn't communicate with each other. Almost every morning, Bill would be on the phone calling the PG&E dam controller and ask what the flows were and try to predict for him whether or not he'd have water so that would release water into the river. It wasn't uncommon for thousands of people to be stranded by the river waiting for the river to come up or not. Later, during SMUD's relicensing process, all affected parties were heard and a compromise was reached, giving flow predictability. It seemed we had to fight for and work extremely hard in every facet of our lives. We started California river trips to both get locals on the river and offer free trips for organizations to use as fundraisers. Our home on the hill had no power or phone, very little water, and an outhouse. When we were here, we lived simply. Sometimes Charlie and Rebecca were watched by guides or neighbors. One guide named Beetle put leashes on them and walked them around the campground like dogs. They loved it. We did private river trips in the spring and fall and slowly built our current house. Over time, guides and river users from our and other companies began to settle here. This community grew with people who loved the river. The river and this foothill land were so much a part of our being that we were deeply committed to protect it. And in time, we grew into the larger fabric of place, volunteering at school, working on campaigns to slow down growth in our county, starting as a local conservancy, making trails to access beautiful places, and eventually realizing more time for our personal creative work. If you love something with all your heart, you do whatever you can to protect it. However, I've learned that it's best for us to have patience in developing the way we can easily, joyfully give back to what has sustained and nurtured us. To not feel guilty or make others feel guilty for not doing what we think at that moment is the only way to participate. Because when we have grown with ways to express ourselves most fully, that extra time in coming into one's own provides a richer and more lasting contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. That was beautiful. Our next speaker is Rebecca Foster, the daughter of Robin. Rebecca is the CEO of the San Francisco Housing Accelerator Fund. She's a wife, a dedicated mother of 3 who has always faced challenges head on with just the right balance of intellect, intuition, and grit. Rebecca is going to talk about how she does this.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Mama. And Charlie and everyone. It's really awesome to get to be here with everybody virtually tonight. And I'm going to imagine that we're actually around a fire by a river, and hope we are soon. So I grow up with the deep identity.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Is everybody seeing Rebecca or are they seeing me? Other participants? No. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure that you're on the screen.
Are you pantomiming my words, Katie?
I'm getting word from the participants that they see everybody. Okay, great. We're good. Okay, carry on. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So I grew up with a story that I still hold dear, that when I was born in 1978, and that midpoint in my mom's story, that it was the year that the drought broke. And I think like that's a piece of that I will come back to, that just is a thread that has run through me since my time on the river and next to the river, is just a pretty boundless sense of optimism. And I trace that back in some ways to feeling like, all right, that drought broke, here we go. And also I know from mom and dad, like the next several years were really the busiest that they had ever been, and started another level of the river industry and tourism in the Coloma Valley. And so I got to grow up really on that hillside, the perch where my mom is now, and at Camp Lotus. And probably everyone who's listening has been to Camp Lotus, but if you haven't, to paint a picture of what it was like a little bit 40 something years ago, it was like, if you have seen Hamilton, in that part where they're like, look around, how lucky we are to be alive right now. Like, I got to be that kid, and it was Camp Lotus. It was having your parents be close by, and you getting to grow up seeing them work and being part of their work, and your little brother close by to plot against or plot with all the time, and having this crew of 17 to 30-year-old, 20 or so of them, river guides at this pivotal point in their life where they were figuring out what it was like to be free, what they wanted to do next, their joy of being in the water and being with each other. And they were both put us on leashes, like my mom said, but also like the people who I learned from, that there was such a thing as an Ivy League school. And so, and that, that I got to watch as like a 10-year-old, like romantic love triangles, and file those away for the future. So that just is like, was such a part of me feeling like I got to have this really cosmopolitan, incredible like sense of community and overlap of people in place as a kid, that extended into me then becoming a river guide myself, and guiding through high school and through college. And then after college, going from I was on the road through most of college. Here comes the 3-kid intervention. And went from these like the Mule Creek Canyon to like sitting in an office on Wall Street, staring down, like 80 feet into the canyons of New York City. But I will say, then spent 8 years in New York working in finance, with a break, actually 10 years coming back to grad school and then going back to New York. But a key piece, one key thread that just like stuck with me through that time was this really deep connection and understanding of that intersection of people and their environment. And so it was both the like river guide piece of the community and the vibrancy and the spirit at Camp Lotus. And it was also this other part my mom talked about, of growing up, seeing the transformation of a place in a really deep way into the Coloma that it is now. And seeing through my parents how being leaders as small business owners and shoulders to cry on, and work partners and political activists, and then for my dad, a politician and a public servant, as the way that you are a contributor and a leader to your community, and the way that you continue to transform and shape it in ways that not just impacted the people passing through it at that time, but now impact all the kids, my niece and nephews, who I see getting to have that experience now with Charlie and Crystal and Lotus. And so I think that too, I brought that with me as like a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed country girl to New York City, and was so curious about that intersection of people and place in an urban environment. And there's so many connections there. And it is the way that humans interact with each other in a big city and interact with their environment. I think I also just dove into and came to love, and that piece of the landscape. I'm now back in San Francisco, and as Katie said, running an organization that finances the production of new affordable housing for people experiencing homelessness and low-income people in San Francisco, and helps buy buildings to prevent people from being displaced and evicted from their longtime communities here. And just two things that other threads that I have thought of through that I feel like are gifts from the river and from my childhood. That one of them is fearlessness, and the other one is love. And I would not have said I was fearless, but a colleague of mine recently said that. And I think that comes from not just running rivers and feeling like you have to have trust in the river and you have to adapt, and if the fearlessness that comes with that. It also comes from feeling like you have so many people who believe in you for your whole life and keep telling you that nothing's impossible and supporting you in that belief. And it takes that same fearlessness to believe you can end homelessness, that it takes to save rivers, and believe we can end climate change and not give up those hopes. And we need that fearlessness about the hardest things that we are facing. And love, I also was reflecting on just the incredible interconnectedness of humans as part of our environment. And my sense of awe-struck feelings of like God in like the high granite Sierras are also the feelings I have in those moments when you see people interacting on the subway or at the farmer's market. So I thank the river for both of those. And at this juncture, I would pass it off.
Thank you. I'm just going to throw it out there, Rebecca Foster for president 2024. I'm planting the seed. So we are going to open up questions now for Robin and Becca. So we have, sorry, the questions are coming in, so let me look at these for a second. So just to address Richard's question, we will be hearing from the other panelists. I'm a little confused on the question, but how their river experiences have affected lives off the river. Richard, if you could clarify your question for me, then I will ask it. In the meantime, I thought of a question, Becca, when you were talking about fearlessness and the fearlessness that you need as in running a river or ending homelessness, but what are you scared of?
That's like whoa, okay. I mean, I think in my day-to-day life, am scared probably mostly of not having enough time and making the most of the time that I have to do the most and make the place I live better and be a great mom and be a great member of my family. I think that's probably what stresses me out the most, maybe on the line with sometimes gives me fear or scared. And I think the big scary things are almost like too scary to allow myself to dwell on for too long. This last week was my most depressed since shelter in place. And I definitely realized it was because nature has been such a respite during the pandemic. And with the smoke, it just, feeling so cooped up was so hard, even if it's like running up Twin Peaks in San Francisco or getting up to see to the river at Lotus. Like, it felt like it was a reminder of it's not just of what an important part of life and regrounding and recentering that is. So I would say that the future of California with the fires and climate change in particular has been very much on my mind lately. There's too many things to be scared of. So try to like switch to action quickly.
That is, thank you for sharing that and for your honesty and vulnerability. So Robin, what is it like seeing your children become the adults that they are today, having raised them in the river community? Did you imagine this would be the path that they ended up taking, or did you have an expectation for them?
I just wanted them to be nice and to be happy and to find life fulfilling. Becca was always a styler. I think one year in grammar school, she wore overalls every day. So I knew she was going to like the city life and be into fashion. And I think I was always a little concerned about Charlie and his friendship with Rush and the trouble they were going to get into. And but I had a talk with him midway through his intense boating years. One night when the full moon was resting behind Mount Murphy, and it was just beautiful. I was sitting on the beach at Camp Lotus, and I was drawing on a canvas. I wrote all along the back the answers to the questions I had for Charlie about what he was doing and my concerns about him dying. And in that conversation, I trusted his eyes and trusted his ability to see where he needed to go on a run, and that he was his own man in making decisions. And it alleviated a kind of low-grade constant concern about him. And so both are remarkable, wonderful people that I feel so lucky to have access to, and they're big helpers to me especially since Bill died. And yeah, they make my life so much better and richer. And yeah, that's about all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin and Becca. Our next speaker is Scott Underwood. He's a physician. He's founder of Scott Free Outfitters a long time ago, owner of Mother Lode Rafting and Children's Education Center, and the father of Adrienne and Emily Underwood, two of my favorite women in the rafting community. Scott, I am excited for you to share your story with everybody tonight. So the stage is yours.
Well, I feel like through the many years that we've lived in Coloma, it was always tough to follow the centers. And I got to say, you guys knocked me out. I love what you said, and I'm choked up. Trying to think about when I came into the river community, and it's pretty easy to remember because I spent my college education looking forward to being a physician, and it didn't seem like it was ever going to happen. But before I actually showed up at UC Davis, I managed to do a hitchhiking tour around the country. I went down through the southern states, up the eastern seaboard to Nova Scotia, and then across Canada to the west, and then ended up back in Berkeley. And then I rolled into UC Davis, and the first thing I saw was the UC Davis OA Whitewater Guide School. So medical school had to wait. The reality was that I had surfed and grew up on the ocean. I loved the ocean. I loved moving water. I loved to surf. And although I was very interested in learning how to be a doctor, there was this crazy pull in me to go learn about the river. So we went up and trained on the Stanislaus. And if you had the good fortune to ever visit the Stanislaus before it was drowned, this was one of the most amazing places on earth. It was just, there was Rose Creek, which was phenomenal. There were the rapids, there was the limestone cliffs and the caves and the petroglyphs. I know Robin, and I assume Becca remembers this. And then I got the bad news is this was going to be drowned, that they'd already built the dam and they were getting ready to drown this place. And wow, I just couldn't get over that. So I was all pumped up. We wrote letters when I was there. Tom Foster, the head of OAUCD, and I did that. We all did. And I thought, that's a great idea. I'll get my medical buddies to write letters. Why not? And so I tried that. And the response was, you know, where's the Stanislaus? And what? I mean, Scott, are you studying human anatomy or what's going on, buddy? And I thought about that. And so then I borrowed a boat and I took them up on the stand. And lo and behold, every one of them wrote a letter. And they all joined, which was a new organization then, Friends of the River. It was really pretty cool. And I thought I was onto something. The only one little problem, I was in medical school and this was kind of busy. And I didn't come in with a big grub stake. I did have an old Volkswagen bus. So I decided to buy a couple rafts, and one of them was a really cool raft called a Udisco, which is was made in China and out of tissue paper. So I learned how to repair foot-long rips and how to do, you know, kind of a cool medical stitch to put it all together. And I started a river company. Why not? What could go wrong after all? So anyway, that company gradually grew, and the purpose of this company was called Scott Free River Expeditions, and the idea was the rivers were going to get off scot-free. I love puns. I think both my girls are now grimacing. So in any event, we started writing letters, and time went by, and by, I think it was going to say 1983 or so, we actually were writing about 300 letters a year. I was feeling pretty good. And we were linked up with Mother Lode River Trips, which was a big company, and we were using their booking agency, The Confluence, and things were going well. And then the high water of 83 came along, and pretty much 600 people canceled for Mother Lode in one day, and that was the end of Mother Lode, pretty much. And it was going to go away, and then I had to figure out a way to do the bookings. Well, it's hard to do river bookings. I mean, I've tried it, but it doesn't work out very well. So I had to do something, and the sensible thing to be, why not? Let's expand and take over Mother Lode. So we did. And it kind of worked, because the next year, we didn't write 300 letters. This would have been 1984. We wrote something like 3,000 letters, and by the next year, we'd written 5,000 letters. And these were all about the Tuolumne. The Tuolumne was under threat at that time. We were trying to get it wild and scenic. And it happened. And that was really cool. And I felt that was a huge accomplishment, and Friends of the River and everybody in the river community should be really proud of that. as well as all the other stuff that has gone down. And I spent a decade on the board of Friends of the River, and I was involved in the American River Conservancy and all this kind of good stuff. But the reality is that the most important thing to me probably was that connection with the river. I mean, we talk about river love, we talk about, you know, whatever this magic is, it's really there. And it's an addiction. And both my girls know that I'm addicted. I mean, and I hope they're addicted. And when rivers come under threat, you know, you get your back up and you feel like you got to do something. Now, I came into the scene actually having worked on conservation issues before. I worked for Paul Ehrlich at Stanford University. It was a dark time. I thought the world was going to end. And I have to say that that's probably the perspective that I have shared with my daughters. And, you know, they're not as lucky as perhaps the centers are, because they have seen this coming. I've been telling this was coming for 40 years. And recently, when it started to burn, my family's response was, oh, wow, Scott's going to be happy. It's finally happening. But I'm really upset about it. And I've been upset about it for a long, long time. And the 25 plus, I don't know, 30,000 letters that we've written, and the 15 rivers that we've helped to save, I hope, you know, that's all good, well and good, but we've got bigger problems. And I've always known that. And I've always hoped that there was a way to connect the dots. So yeah, I'm in favor of Becca for president. But right now, I want Biden to win, because we've written 2,000 letters to Kamala Harris the last couple of years, and I'm hoping to call those in. It's time for somebody to put up or shut up here. We really need to do something not only about climate change. That's one of the 12 different things that were identified back in the 60s as being a problem. I mean, you know, ocean acidification, blah, blah, blah. My science writer daughter can fill you in on that. But now's the time. And whether it's rivers or it's oceans or it's, you know, you choose it. The world is under threat. Now, the planet's not going away. The way I have evolved into thinking about this over the years is that this is going to be the end of the world as I like it. Not so much the world's ending, it's still going to be there, but you're not going to be able to breathe the air, and you know, can't drink the water, and people are starving and so forth. So they say emergency room doctors tend to look on the dark side, and there's truth to that. There's definitely truth to that. But we also tend to be pretty logical. And the logic to me is, this dude who's in the White House hasn't a clue, and he really needs to be replaced by somebody much, much better. And then down the road, we all need to pull this together worldwide to make the kind of difference that Californians have made over their rivers. I mean, if you think about this, there is no way we should have been able to save the rivers we saved in California. No way. The odds were overwhelming that we would lose. Overwhelming. But you know what? We won. How do we do that? People like Bill Center, people like Mark Dubois, people like Ron Stork, they would not give up. The odds were phenomenally against them, but they would not give up. So I love the optimism that you're expressing, Becca, and I think we totally need that. And I'm very excited about your perspective. And I know, having known your parents all these years, where it comes from. I hope my girls have a certain amount of that optimism, but I really hope they have resilience, because we're going to get our ass kicked, and we're going to have to actually overcome that in order to make the world a better place. Yeah, my generation's messed it up, no doubt about it. But I spent my entire life trying to mitigate that, and I'm frustrated that we are where we are. But it doesn't mean we quit now. Actually, what we do now is we boot up. And I think that as I look at the wonderful people that are here this evening. Becca and the girls and everybody else. And thanks for the cat, that we can do this. So love to all of you, and river love to the rivers. Let's do it.
Thank you, Scott, so much, and just remarkable work, so inspiring. You know, I am very optimistic because of the people I see in this, I'm going to call it room tonight, who are working hard and carrying the torch. And the world can feel dark, but I like to think that we can continue your guys' work. And one of the shining examples, woman, Adrienne Underwood, your daughter, is an incredible example of the younger generation really working boots on ground to continue your work. Adrienne works on policy in the Legislative Affairs Office for the California State Parks Foundation. And Adrienne, I'm really excited to hear about your journey and from Coloma to DC and all over, and how the river has impacted you.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, for me, it has felt, I'm not a type A personality, so it has felt for me that like my career has been an extremely winding path, but obviously, you know, hearing from my dad, it's like a very direct line in what I have cared about and wanted to work on for my entire career, which has been climate change and environment, and really working within the advocacy space there. But, you know, I think I was thinking a lot about coming into this conversation and just how, you know, obviously the relationship with the Coloma Lotus Valley kind of informed my perspective. And there's not, for me, there's not like one river story that really defines my relationship with the river. I loved Rebecca's description of like, what, this is my life all the time, right? I mean, this is just growing up in kind of this beautiful Narnia that was my playground. And I have so many amazing memories of being on the river, being, you know, in the valley, that absolutely informed my love for this place. But I also, you know, was the daughter of an outfitter, and if you weren't careful, you could be like roped into work at any time. So I'd be, you know, playing by the river, and it was, you had to be really careful not to get roped into, you know, licking stamps or folding brochures to be sending to customers. So I got really good. I mean, like any river guide, you know, I was really good from a young age of shirking my duties for the family business. And so I think, you know, obviously, like there's really very little doubt that the love of the environment and the feeling of like an absolute need to do something with my life that would contribute to these existential threats that my father has outlined for all of us, you know? So I think, right, like that is what I've spent my life doing. But the connection with the river itself, growing up, there was always this tension between it being like a beautiful, fun place and a business for me. So I think it's really taken kind of my career and time away from our valley to really redefine my own relationship with it in a lot of ways. And so I did like was mentioned, I lived in DC, I lived in New York, and I ended up back in San Francisco a couple of years ago, and, you know, was really working on work that I felt like was incredibly important in firms that like also believed it was very, very important and high pressure, and a lot of, you know, like all of our hours spent there working on issues that, you know, relate to values that I care about a lot. But being in San Francisco for the first time, you know, since I was younger, was able to come up to Coloma on the weekends. And I started to have the experience of going from like, you know, in a dark office, like wrapped around my computer typing away, to these weekends of being on the river, like sun on my skin, splashed in the face by water, you know, and it was just this, it was a really intense juxtaposition between what I had forgotten is absolutely my life force, you know, like what makes me feel like myself and whole and happy, and what I believe is good and needs to be done. And so the kind of this like fight between those two things, and it was intense, and it was actually like, it would be, I mean, people say like the Mondays, but I would just be so sad like coming back to my desk from the weekend. And so, you know, I think that reintroduction to the river, it brought a lot of joy, but also brought this withdrawal. And yeah, I kind of got to this crossroads where I felt like I was really, you know, climbing this ladder in my career, where you know, I think about our relationship to nature, and I was thinking about like why the river this week when I was thinking about this talk. And you know, a career, it's always like analogous to climbing a mountain, right? You're going up and up, and you're working all the way up, and that's great. I love hiking. You know, I like all sorts of outdoor sports, but there's something about the river that's really different. And I think what's so incredible about it in a lot of ways is that it's not this upward trajectory. Like even the best boater is constantly being really brought down a peg by the river. You go and, you know, like my sister planned this trip for us to go on East Carson, and it's a class, you know, 1 river. It's very easy. And I managed to wrap the boat and was standing like on the one rock in the river. And you know, those are the moments where you like just stop taking yourself seriously. And I think, as my dad would always say growing up, you know, like shit goes sideways, and that's what you expect to have happen. And it doesn't matter that it goes sideways. It's just how quick you pick it up. And I think I've found incredible value. I've found incredible sustaining, you know, life supporting that like Zaza Zoom or whatever it is, you know, that makes you want to keep going, makes you want to keep doing the work that I just was completely devoid of for a really long time. And so coming back to the river and being just totally, you know, like it can be peaceful, it can be beautiful. It's a different river every day, but it will also, yeah, take you down a peg, and you can just realize, you know, that humility and the sense of humor that goes with that is priceless.
Thank you, Adrienne. That was awesome. So now we have Emily Underwood, Adrienne's sister, and a dear friend of mine. Emily is a freelance science writer and editor for the California Native Plant Society. I highly recommend people to read her work. It's pretty remarkable. I have to brag about you just for a second, because I like just admire you so much. Emily is one of the kindest, smartest, honest, and most humble people that I know. And I consider a true leader through authenticity and just by example of being who you are. So I'm not gonna say any more other than go ahead and talk.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm gonna try to like read my own handwriting and look at the screen at the same time, so wish me luck. But just to get started, as you can tell already, I grew up around some incredible storytellers. My dad was an emergency room doctor who ran an ER in Sonora, and he had the most amazing bedtime stories. It was like the little girl who got bit by a rattlesnake, and the man who hacked his own leg off with a chainsaw. So there were those stories which were incredible. A lot of them, like the little girl who did XYZ and then something happened to her spine. And there were a lot of cautionary tales. It's true. However, there were also a lot of like silly, wonderful raft guide stories. We all know these, there I was, dude, no shit, there I was stories. I savor those to this day. There were people who kind of like were in themselves these incredible legends and stories. The first person who comes to mind is Cassidy Bell, who worked for Mother Lode for years and would sleep on a 2x12 in the eddy, like a 2x12 that was suspended between two boulders for like entire seasons. He would just sleep on this plank suspended over the water. He was pretty legendary. But one of them, but the story that I think, one of the stories that made me really want to be a science writer, I've been a science journalist for 10 years now. I've written about the environment, but I've also written a lot about mental health and neuroscience. Anyway, I think that the story that really sparked that for me, among others, but was the South Fork American story that Becca and Charlie's dad told. Bill Center, he had this amazing, I think many people listening to this probably heard this story. And I remember sitting, in the Coloma Valley with, a group of other people sort of rapt, listening to Bill tell this story. And it was Bill's way of, welcoming people to our home, to this kind of granite bowl in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. And the story started 100 million years ago, which I remember being a kid and having, 100 million years ago, just blow my mind. It started with the formation of, the Sierra Nevada batholith, still my favorite vocabulary word to this day. I could say it over and over and over again, like say it with me. It's like batholith. It's so good. So this big bubble of granite that formed, it was 400 miles long, and it just these facts that Bill could tie together with feeling and narrative, talking about the migrations of plate tectonics and people and sort of how we all got to this place in this valley, in this, granite canyon, and that, it didn't have to be this way. The place that we were sitting could have been underwater. But that people who loved the valley had worked really hard to make sure that we could still go ride down that water, moving downhill. And I really think that storytelling, we were not a religious family. We were I don't know, humanists, atheists. But for me, that was the closest thing I got to like a Genesis story, as my begats, like where we all came from, and a story that kind of made sense of where we were and pointed forward to where we could go. It sort of gave us agency. So I moved to Baltimore. I went to grad school. I found myself looking for a topic for my thesis, and I wanted to go back to that origin story. I wrote my thesis sort of on the history of watersheds in the Sierra Nevada. And I think it was returning that story over and over again and realizing it's never the same story. And there are layers upon layers of that story. And the more you learn, the more there is, you realize sort of the more there is to learn about it, which is such a gift. I think the only career that seems as fun to me as river guiding is science writing, because I just get to sort of follow my curiosity wherever it goes. And I think I got the gift of that curiosity from my parents and from people like Bill and from the sort of insatiably curious, adventurous people of the river community. Yeah, so there's the point I want to make about writing and learning and mental health, because I think mental health and the environment. These are two themes that can keep coming up. And I want to share this metaphor about mental health that really speaks to me and always has. And I think the problem with being a human with a brain, especially a depressed human sometimes, in times like these, is it's a lot like being in a sleeping bag zipped up with your own farts, right? Like you're stuck in this bag. And it's like a pretty good metaphor for like where we are as a planet, right? We're like stuck in this insulated cover with our own farts. And for me, being on the river, like getting that cold splash of water in the face, talking to other people who love the river, is a really surefire way to kind of like open up the bag and get some fresh air in there. The same thing goes for learning and writing and connecting with this community. So I hope other people can find that too and join, especially now when we're all feeling a little claustrophobic. And I just want to kind of return to what I think is important about storytelling, which is that it helps us understand how we got to this point, and it gives us some agency over where we go next. So yeah, you guys are wonderful. It's so nice to be here with you guys.
It really is. Can we do this more?
Yeah,
I'm having so much fun, and like I'm laughing so much by myself. That's the norm, I guess everybody is. So we're gonna open up, I already had a couple questions come in. We're gonna open up some questions to the Underwood family. The first question is for Scott, which is how did some of the skills you developed on the river transcend into your career as an emergency room physician?
First of all, I guess the experience on the river very definitely helped me perform as a physician, because it calmed me down and it put me in direct connection with physical processes which were immutable, which, you know, you had to really get down into the science, and that's how medicine is as well. I remember telling the girls that when I was in an ER situation where it was overwhelming, I often thought about rowing a big rapid and tried to relax and stay in the zone. Had plan A, plan B. When you hit the rock and spun, you know, you had to deal with it. I think it helped a lot.
I think what you have to understand also is the Underwoods are at their best in chaos. Like calm waters, we are a disaster. But if you get us into that like disaster mode, we're in the zone. So that's definitely got that from Dad.
That's a skill. So the next question is for Emily and Adrienne, which you can both answer, but talk a little bit about being women in this male dominant field and young women, you know, growing up, the daughters of an outfitters and then becoming raft guides yourself, and, you know, interesting road for all of us women, but I know several people in the audience want to hear what that was like for each of you.
Can I go first, Adrienne? I just want to start, I'm really glad you asked that, because I want to start with the positive, which is that, so I was at a friend's house, and they had a book of like, it was Women of the Grand Canyon, and I opened it up, and the page that I opened it to was Barbara Thomas, talking about her as like one of the first legendary female canyon guides. And I think, you know, I don't think I even know how incredible it was to grow up in a community of women like Barbara, women like Robin, people who, women who just like pioneered in ways that, as rough as it was to be a young woman in the boating community for our generation, yeah, just like a totally different and just incredibly, physically and mentally strong. And I feel like I had a lot of amazing role models. So that was the good part. I think that, there's been a lot of discussion, and I think really productive and important discussion around kind of the norms, what's expected of women in rafting and in kayaking. I remember at one point, it took me a long time to kind of realize that it wasn't me. I wasn't awkward. I am awkward, that's true, but like that wasn't the problem. That, there was no reason that I should have to change who I was or what kinds of jokes I was comfortable with or who the hell I slept with or didn't to make the mostly male guides around me feel better about themselves. It took me years out of the boating community to really get that. And I think it was a hard education, but I'm so glad that we're talking about it honestly now. And that hopefully those norms are starting to change, and that, women are supporting other women in boating, and that men are standing up and no longer tolerating what's just essentially bullying. Adrienne, any thoughts?
Well, I think I said earlier, I like avoided being a commercial guide like the plague. So, but it is neat. I do think that increasingly too, it is really about, and I've seen this also kind of in the corporate space, right? I think you have to have like camaraderie among women to make progress, but also like it always takes the I don't know, people to advocate for themselves. And it does seem like, anyways, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I was just thinking, I am seeing more like increasingly in the Coloma Lotus Valley, there are, groups that are specifically focused on like women learning skills and kayaking and all of that. And I think that's really, really positive. So.
Okay, and thank you, Underwood. The next duo is father-son duo, Peter and Rush Sturges. We're going to start with Peter. Peter is the founder and owner of Otter Bar Kayak School. Excuse me. Otter Bar Kayak School, which is a iconic kayak academy. It's known worldwide, and really because of Peter's work with the school, thousands and thousands of people have developed a love for the river, which has created so much protection in the long run. So Peter, I am going to hand over the stage to you to talk about your experience with Otter Bar, which for those of you who don't know, it's an outfitting operation in one of the most remote regions in the lower 48. Go ahead, Peter.
Are we there?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I had a little glitch there. Emily, your metaphor I found interesting, and I thought I'd start with that because I feel like I'm zipped up in a sleeping bag with President Trump's farts. Anyhow, I feel like my comments tonight are probably not even remotely in line with everyone else's, and I feel like I'm going to be scrambling here, but I know there's people out there right now who have been to Otter Bar and love us, and we love them back. And we've been doing this 40 years, and we weren't able to operate this year due to COVID, and we are fully planning to run in 21. However, if we can, we will, and we hope we can. But if we don't, it'll probably be basically the end of Otter Bar Kayak School. And I'm sorry to announce that here, but that is the reality. Now that said, we fully plan on running the season if we can, but we will be having Otter Bar available for private bookings if that's where we're headed. And Christy and I have been doing this for 40 years, and we're both 70 years old. So we're ready to make a change. But I thought I would just bring some stuff up that about the evolution of Otter Bar, which I'm not sure is so appropriate in this milieu that we have right here. But I grew up in Rhode Island, Narragansett Bay. I was around a lot of boats. So, you know, my passion for setting up this school came from my love of boats. And when I was 21, I bought an interest in a topsail schooner and sailed to the Caribbean to do charter work. And that was an ill-fated mission. The boat sank eventually, so I lost a little bit of money that I had inherited. And I then made my way up to Alaska, and I commercial fished for Dungeness and salmon as a full purse seiner. And at the end of my first season there, I spent 3 seasons up there. I got a letter from some great friends who had moved to Forks of Salmon, and they said, "Get here. This place is cool. Come to Forks of Salmon." So anyhow, I made my way to Forks of Salmon in my house truck in the fall of 1972. And I proceeded to, I really moved there to get away from boats. I was tired of the booze and, you know, all of that stuff. And so it really was crazy because I bought a drift boat right away because I thought that was such a cool design. And I started rowing dories on rivers. And during the off seasons, I would go and move boats in various different places in the world. I did a transatlantic trip and up and down the East Coast, West Coast, and all that. And so I guess what I'm shooting for here is to just give you a sense of my passion for doing crazy things. And Otter Bar was certainly one of them. In January, let's see, March or 81, I bought Otter Bar, 40 acres. And the idea originally was to do a wilderness retreat. It's hard to sell that. And then we did some fly schools with Club Pacific first and then Orvis second. And but also in 1981, I met a guy named Larry Hewitt who ran the outdoor program at Humboldt State, and he had some kayaks. And so anyhow, he brought up some kayaks. We did the first class in 81. 82, I bought a bunch of boats and we were off and running. And the problem was that this idea, this running Otter Bar, it was a dream that was very unlikely because we were 8 hours from the nearest, you know, place. Portland is 8 hours. Bay Area was 8 hours. It was very difficult to get it to go. And but we were fortunate in 1984 to have a guy named Michael McRae write a piece on us that really catapulted us. And this all sounds awfully self-centered or whatever, certainly in light of all of what you've said. But it is how it evolved. And I'm thinking there are people who have been to Otter Bar that are out there that haven't heard these stories. So anyhow, we were off and running with that article. And then also around that time, another person that was around then that came from that article was a woman named Sue Langford, Sue Langford Fuller now, I think, who totally helped us make this thing a reality. And so I wanted to point that out. Also, during these years, we had one other good piece of good fortune. There was a thing called the Great Outdoor Adventure Fair in San Francisco, which some of you might remember. And we had someone come into our booth that was very interested, and she said, "My boss is going to love this place." And well, her boss was Larry Burke, and so Larry Burke came with his daughter and had the time of their lives. This is the kind of thing that really helps when you have a fledgling business like we did. He loved the place, and so after he was here, he called and called me up and said, "Hey, Peter, I got a great idea. I want to run it by you." And I said, "Well, what's that, Larry?" And he said, "Well, I want to bring my editors up to Otter Bar. David Quammen, Tim Cahill, Hal Espin, John Krakauer, and their wives. And we want to do a collaborative article about Otter Bar." And I said, "Oh, I don't know, Larry, let me think about it." So, obviously something like this was huge. And so we did get a piece that David Quammen wrote. And so that kind of set us in motion this was a tricky deal. You guys are in the Bay Area and you got all these people. And so, clients are not your problem, but they were our problem. And the magic of this place was made by maybe some of the people that are listening out there. Maybe Frank Culver. Are you there, Frank? You know, people like Frank who came here a bunch of times, he really made it happen. Anyhow, and we also, so things evolved in the 90s, the mid 90s, we started up our kids programs, 95. And so in 1995, Rush was 10 years old, and I actually designed the kids programs for him because I wanted him to have that to do. And so the morning of the first kids week, sorry, Rush, I know you hate this stuff. The morning of the first kids class, I said, okay, Rush, time to get up. Kids class happening. And he looked at me and said, Dad, I don't want to take the course. I'm not interested in kayaking. I don't like kayaking. It's all about you. You like kayaking. I said, Rush, come on. I set this whole thing up for you. And he said, no, I don't want to do it. And I don't like parents that push their kids. So anyhow, I went down to the instructors meeting and asked them, told them that Rush wasn't taking the class. So one of the guides came up and said, okay, hey, Rush, I hear you're not taking the class. And he goes, no, I don't like kayaking. And they said, okay, well, will you help the kids get in the boats and kind of get them going? Because I think you know something about it. And so he did, and the rest is history. So anyhow, one of my favorite stories, but the rest has heard it way too many times. So anyhow, then we on into the 90s, the early 90s, or rather the late 90s, we were doing extremely well because of the .com thing and all that. And then, into the future, the biggest thing that has made Otter Bar absolutely exceptional, besides the fact that we have an incredible product, which I'm not going to bang that drum right now, but I think you guys all probably know that, are the people who we love so much that come. And it's really hard to think about not having them come, because they are, we have people come 3 years in a row, or rather three times each season. So kayaking kind of flatlined. It's very difficult to run this business in the 2000s because, after .com thing went down, it just got really slow. And people like Frank and many others, they just kept coming back. And so for that, we are profoundly grateful. And if there's anything that made us, it's them. So also, so I need to drink some water. The local grassroots operation, the Salmon River Restoration Council, I wanted to mention, we have always stressed the whole environmental aspect of running rivers. And, we bring people here and then they have a vested interest in what we do. And that's been amazing. And a lot of these people have donated and helped our groups here. So Salmon River Restoration Council does riparian stuff. They monitor logging sales and things like that. And so I would do a thing with the clients each week. And really, we did a lot of substantive things, hosting groups and things like that in years past that to educate, people as to why you want to protect a place like this. So my talk tonight really should have been more about that sort of thing. But in fact, there is one other story that relates to you guys a little bit, because I think you know these people. But in the late 70s, I got a kayak. And so I got into kayaking and I was a little, out to lunch, frankly. I started with an inner tube and that kind of hurt, especially in the class 5 rapids. But there were hardly any kayakers at that time. And so anytime there was a kayaker that came around, I would I'd go, hey, can I go paddling with you? And this one day, these 3 guys were there, and I'd never heard of them, but it was Chuck Stanley, Lars Holbeck, and Don Banducci. And I said, can I go with you guys? And they asked me my name, and then they went, oh, no, not that guy. And I said, what do you mean? And they go, you're famous. Get out of our face. So anyhow, I was swimming everything, and I was a complete disaster. But a quick story there. I'll just close by saying it's great to be here with you guys tonight. And I'm sorry that I didn't bring a level of substance that you all brought. So anyhow, I'll turn it over to somebody else.
Thank you, Peter. And certainly you are very humble, just like your son. But what you have done for the kayaking community is huge. I think everybody listening and anybody who has been to Otter Bar could attest to that. Without people loving the river, without people getting on the river, there is no Friends of the River. There are no organizations to come together to do the kind of work without the work that, Mother Lode does with the education and what Otter Bar does. It really starts by creating that experience that people can have and that connection to the river. So I don't want you to underestimate what you have done for the whitewater and river community and rivers of California. Last but not least is Rush Sturges. Rush is a accomplished professional kayaker. He's a musician, he's a film director and owner of River Roots Productions. He has dedicated his life to giving the river a voice through cinematography. And Rush is hands down probably the most talented person I know. But more importantly, he's probably the most loyal friend that you could have. He has saved my life both on and off the river more than once. Go ahead, Rush.
Thank you for that very nice intro, Katie. Appreciate it and appreciate all the work you do, as well as everyone else here. I feel honored to be here tonight. It's a really amazing collection of perspectives, so I'm just happy to contribute mine. Yeah, I am the son of Peter Sturges. Grew up at Otter Bar Kayak School in Northern California. One thing my dad didn't mention is just kind of how remote this area is that we grew up in. I mean, he did kind of say it, it's 5 hours round trip to the nearest grocery store, but it's also completely off the grid, extremely isolated. There's a one-room schoolhouse that I attended there that had a total of 10 kids in it with 2 other kids in my grade. And so I feel like in a lot of ways, I grew up at the kayak school, kind of surrounded by adults and the instructors that worked there. And my dad's story is absolutely true. In terms of learning to kayak, I was, to be honest, just absolutely terrified of the sport when I first started it. And I think there was a certain degree of pressure, not necessarily from my parents, but I think pressure from myself to be good at the sport. And growing up at a renowned kayak school, I think I felt some obligation to be a superstar right out the gate or something. And when that wasn't the case, I just decided I don't like this, and I was going to be kind of rebellious. And the story I wanted to bring up is really the sort of the moment when I kind of started to understand the sport on a deeper level. And that was when I was 14 years old, and my dad invited me to come down the Grand Canyon of the Colorado. My parents were running trips down the Grand at that time. And it just had a profound impact on me. For those unfamiliar with the river trip, it's a 14-day trip. It's an expedition in its own right, even though it's a commercial type trip. And every day you're sort of moving, further back in time as you cut through the canyon and these different layers of rock, and you're sleeping under the stars every night. You're with this whole crew that really becomes your team, and there's this certain degree of camaraderie and respect. And I think it was for me definitely a spiritual awakening. And I remember, being under the stars one night at Granite Creek Rapid and turning to my dad and saying, I'm having the best time of my life right now. And it was literally just this epiphany moment where I just decided right there on the spot that I was going to do everything in my power to make this my life and to pursue it as a profession. And it was right around that same time as well that I picked up a video camera, and the family sort of camcorder we had laying around. And I have to give my mom credit in this regard, because she really instilled a love of movies in me from an early age. She brought us up on musicals and all the classics. And, going to the movies was a big deal for me as a kid, especially living in this, tiny little town. So I kind of realized early on that was also going to fit into my sort of story to some extent. Initially my films were pretty bad. I made a lot of what we call, kayak porn, action, not a whole lot of storyline, but and Charlie Center was a big part of that whole part of my kind of growth. And, over the years, I just kind of started developing and making more films and traveling, and somehow was actually able to, turn this into a profession and make it sustainable, and actually make money doing it. And there's a very small niche of, people who in the world who are actually sort of able to make that happen. And I feel like I was fortunate to sort of have this diverse set of things that I just really loved, that I was sort of able to kind of balance it out in that way. And, it allowed me to travel the world. And I think today, my films, I hope are evolving into something more meaningful. I do feel like stories are such an important way to bring other people, not just into the sport of kayaking, but to also give them a deeper understanding of nature itself. There's a quote, wilderness is not a luxury, but a necessity of the human spirit. And, I'm just thankful that my parents sort of instilled that passion in me from an early age. And, I would like to extend that thanks out to the whole community of everyone who's come before us, Bill and Robin for putting up with mine and Charlie's antics at Camp Lotus for all those years, literally letting me live there every summer for, year after year. And for also, advocating for, preserving the natural environment and rivers. You're doing an amazing job, and I hope that we can make you proud moving forward, and that we can fix this issue of climate change and educate people better, and just do a good job to be stewards of the river. So thank you to everybody out there for your support, and much love to you all.
Thank you, Rush and Peter. So we are a couple questions and then we'll wrap this up. Peter, what will you do with Otter Bar, or what will you do if you retire from Otter Bar if there's not another season? Can people hear me? Okay.
You gotta unmute.
Okay, how about that now?
There we go.
Okay, good. Well, we did have a chance to sell this operation, but we've decided against that. So we are going to keep it, and I'm going to maintain all these bloody buildings. But what we will do is we'll make Otter Bar available to people like a VRBO. So it won't be Otter Bar Kayak School, but it'll be the lodge and the beaches and the whole thing that people will rent for the week. And so it'll be groups that know each other, so that the COVID thing is a non-issue. So that's about the only, we did that this year with a couple of groups, and it was a blast. But it's not what we've been doing, but also what we've been doing is involved a huge amount of staff and office work. And, it's just very intense, but albeit only 3 months, but it's still, we're ready for a change, honestly. And like I say, the only regret is that how much we love the people that have been coming here forever. But yeah, we'll be doing private bookings.
Well, thank you again for the thousands and thousands of people you've got on the river. Rush, you are a leader and a little bit of a celebrity in the kayaking community. But what can you tell to younger generations? Like, how can people get involved these days, particularly through media, and talk a little bit more about, the power and the influence that, media can have on not just giving a voice, but actually, creating policy that can protect places?
I think one of the most amazing things right now is just how accessible cameras are, to be honest. I mean, you can make a really high caliber film on an iPhone, but I think what I would encourage kids to do is to really look into the art of storytelling, and I think that's something that through trial and error, I've learned, and from, it's really not so much about the technology as much as it is about investing into your characters, understanding your characters, getting to tell a good story. So, even though everybody has access to these amazing devices now, read and learn ways that you can document what's around you, because you might find that just what's in your backyard is absolutely fascinating. And yeah, I think that it's a good time right now to get out there, pick up your camera and tell a story.
Awesome. And I just have one shameless plug for Friends of the River as a digital strategist. If you're tuning in tonight, please follow them on Instagram, follow them on Facebook. We all need to be in the know and on the pulse of what they are doing, so when they need our help, we know how to help. Thank you, everybody, for the wonderful evening. Charlie has some closing remarks.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, guests, for sharing all the insights and stories tonight. I am really, I would say, just in awe and thankful how open everybody was in sharing their experiences. I hope everyone found this discussion and the Riverside chat as entertaining and insightful as I did. And I'd say hearing everyone tonight, the stories from one generation to the next, it's always a reminder to me of the power of the river to impact all our lives, to weave together the eclectic and vibrant community that we're all fortunate to be a part of, that we pull strength from, that we identify with, and a community that revels in the wildness of rivers, that we all could dance in the settling dusk of River Canyon, shout and hoot to the moon in appreciation for the past, present, and future. I have never, ever found a community that is bound by as strong of ties as those of our community, the river community. And I would say that unfortunately, this bond, it's not a right. The fabric of this community and the places we love, it's not a guarantee. Someday maybe, but not today. And so we must constantly be present, involved, and aware, strive to keep our community and the places we love protected, cherished. And as we end the night, remember to always be thankful, always be active, always be vigilant. And when possible, support and join organizations like Friends of the River that are supporting those things that we all love, now more than ever. And above all else, remember to show everyone and anyone the places that we love, to take people to the special places so they see in their own way why we love what we love. And I'd also just like to say to Peter and Otter Bar especially, that you have done that along with Mother Lode as much as anybody, and shared that amazing stretch of river with thousands and thousands of people, and impacted the environment in such a positive way. So I really hope that this is not the last year, but the impact that you have is amazing, you and Christy. And I always think about what my dad would say. And he said, I think the most important single thing that I've learned is the power of one or two people to quite literally change the world. And that when you make a commitment that you really care about something and you invest in what you care about, it changes the way that people around you look at it. So with that, thank you, everybody, and good night.